Greetings, fellow readers and story lovers, and welcome back to my channel. So, not too very long ago, I read the first book in the Discworld series, The Color of Magic, and I had a really good time with it. So, I thought I was gonna go back immediately with The Light Fantastic, which is the second book in the Discworld series, and tell you all how that went. So, The Light Fantastic is a sequel to The Color of Magic, and it directly picks up from the story in The Color of Magic. So, we're back with Rincewind, we're back with Twoflower, and we're back with the luggage, which I was really excited about because I really enjoyed the luggage in the last book. Also, a character that is back is Death, which you wouldn't necessarily be able to tell from the back cover, but as I said in the last video on The Color of Magic, I also listen to the audiobooks, so you get like kind of like a cast list at the beginning, and it said that Bill Nighy was returning, who voiced Death in the Color of Magic audiobook. So I was kind of excited to see the return of Death, the character, not the event. I'm also really excited to return to Discworld in general because, like I said, I had a really good time with The Color of Magic, and I just was happy to go back to it. And I'm also very curious to see how Pratchett continues the story because, like I said, I really enjoyed his writing style. I really enjoyed the world that he was building. So I'm glad to be back. So, immediately, what becomes apparent is this is a sequel in the truest sense of the word. It kind of expects you to have read The Color of Magic, and it doesn't really hold your hand while you're reading and like while you're getting back into it. There's literally a line in it where like, oh, I could recount the details of The Color of Magic, but I wouldn't want you to die of boredom. Which very Pratchett, very funny. But like I said, it's not really gonna hold your hand, so you have to have read The Color of Magic in order to read The Light Fantastic, which I find a little bit curious because at the back of each of these books there's kind of like a page where they list all of the novels in the Discworld series, and they say at the top like you can read these in any order, but this is the publication order. And kind of softly disagree on that because I think you really need to have read The Color of Magic. But also, it doesn't really pick up straight where The Color of Magic left off. If you recall, in my last video, I said, and again, spoilers for The Color of Magic and also spoilers for The Light Fantastic. I'm going to keep it light in the beginning, but I am going to go full spoilers and tell you about the ending and how I felt about the ending as we get further on into this review. So just, be warned. Like I said in the last video, The Color of Magic ends with Rincewind falling off the edge of the Discworld. And this picks up from that, but it takes about 25, 30 pages to get there. Before that, there is really kind of like subtle hints and nods at it. So before Rincewind falls off the edge of the world, there's this whole thing where one of the countries in the Discworld is about to launch an expedition to find out Great Atuan's, the world sky turtle's sex. And in the opening, there's kind of like, and they refer to Great Atuan as he, and then, or indeed a she, which, kind of like branches off of that. Also, like I said, it takes about 25, 30 pages to get back to where The Color of Magic left off, because we get like an introduction to the Unseen University where Rincewind went. It's kind of like mentioned offhand in the first book, but now we actually get to see that. But then once we get back to Rincewind, it kind of like picks off like right where that left off. And we are back with Rincewind, we are back with Twoflower, we are back with the luggage, and a new adventure kind of takes its course. Also, I noted that the characters do evolve over the course of the story, but they remain very consistent. So Rincewind is still reluctant to partake in any adventure. He's kind of selfish, but also slightly empathetic, or like at least you kind of feel empathy with him. You still have Twoflower, who's very naive, who kind of like doesn't really understand how the Discworld works because, like I already said in the last review, he's from the counterweight continent. So he's very, very new to the Discworld, and he's kind of like traveling it as the world's first tourist. So he doesn't really know how this world works, but he is very endearing in it. The luggage is still this recurring gag, although it has a lot of personality. I almost felt like it had more personality in The Light Fantastic than it had in The Color of Magic. But again, like, I really enjoyed it every time it showed up. It's very funny. Like, it eats people on the regular. It's That's the kind of humor in the Discworld series. So also, like I said, Death comes back again, voiced by Bill Nighy in the audiobook. Highly recommend. He is fantastic in that role. Like, he's sort of surprisingly helpful. Like, he gets summoned by the wizards because they want to figure out what's going on, and he just tells them, like, yeah, this is what happened. That's it. He just There's no mystery around that. He's not like, which is, I don't know why I was expecting. Maybe because, like, Death, you're kind of supposed that he's this mysterious otherworldly creature, and he is otherworldly. But again, like, also he's like very irreverent. Like, the wizard who summons him keeps wanting to address him or like be like, "I command thee," and he's just kind of like, "Could you just stop? Could you just ask me the question, will you?" So continues to shine. And I also noted in the last series that I really enjoy Pratchett's writing style, and this is continued in The Light Fantastic. So straight up from the opening line, we have the opening line is, "The sun rose slowly as if it wasn't sure it was worth the effort." And that is such a great opening line. Not necessarily because he tells you like what's going on or what's happening or what the setting is, but because it gives you such an immediate entry point into this world, into the humor that Pratchett is writing with. And then it continues like straight on into like explaining kind of the Discworld lore or explaining the Discworld magic. I'm not entirely sure I want to call it magic. The characters in the book call it magic, but there is so much sense to it. It straight up continues into explaining why the sun rises slowly, and like, because there's like a strong magical field, and that's why the light kind of like spills slowly. On the Discworld, the magic was embarrassingly strong, which meant that the soft yellow light of dawn flowed over the sleeping landscape like the caress of a gentle lover, or, as some would have it, like golden syrup. It paused to fill up the valleys. It piled up against the mountain ranges. When it reached Cori Celesti, the 10-mile spire of grey stone and green ice that marked the hub of the disk and was the home of its gods, it built up in heaps until it finally crashed in great, lazy tsunami, as silent as velvet, across the dark landscape beyond. It's so metaphorical, it's so vivid. Like, I can see it, I can picture it in my head. Like, so great opening, immediately back in with it. And then a little bit later on, we get the explanation of why Rincewind survived falling off the edge of the Discworld. And because he has the eighth spell of the Octavo, the magic book, lodged in his head. And this kind of like keeps coming up throughout the novel. Like I said, light spoiler warning ahead, that he keeps surviving because the spell, like, it's a little bit of a coin toss between like, is the spell helping him survive, or did the spell lodge itself in his head because he is good at surviving. But it's kind of like, it kind of gives him a little bit of plot armor, but it's also, I think, a very clever subversion of this trope of plot armor, and like, yeah, the protagonist survives because he has to, like. But I do have like a little bit of an issue with this whole like, oh, the spell of the Octava lodged itself in his head because he's good at surviving. Because in the previous book, this whole thing, like why Rincewind has the spell in his head, was presented as a dare. And like, so he was dared and he chose to do it. And now it's kind of like, no, the spell specifically chose him because he's good at surviving. And I feel like that takes a little bit away of Rincewind's agency. So like, I was kind of like, yeah, I get it. It's presented in a very clever way, but did you have to take away his agency? I kind of feel a little bit conflicted about that. So moving on to kind of like the story of this new book, and this is kind of like where we will get into more major spoilers. First of all, this story is more coherent than the story and the plot of The Color of Magic. I said in the last review that The Color of Magic is really like episodic, and every chapter kind of like tells an episode of Rincewind and Two Flowers' journey across the Discworld. And this one has very much a through line, like not right at the beginning, but pretty much in the first act, really. There appears a red star in the sky, and everyone is kind of like losing it and like, oh my god, it's the end of the world, and we're gonna crash into the star. And it's continuously mentioned, like every time like a character looks up into the sky, it's like, oh, it's bigger than it was last night. And at some point, it continues to be visible throughout the day. So like it really becomes this through line of, oh, this is where we're headed. Kind of like, are we gonna crash into the star? Is the star gonna crash into us? So like this becomes very much a through line throughout this book. We still have episodes and subplots, and this is kind of like, particularly at the beginning, we get like episode for episode until we catch up with Rincewind and Two Flower. So not completely different from The Color of Magic, but like I said, more of a through line than there was in the previous book. There are a few episodes that I kind of want to highlight. At one point, Rincewind and Two Flower end up in a gingerbread house, and there is this like illusion, kind of like hint towards if this is the gingerbread house from Hansel and Gretel. Like they even mention, oh, there used to be a witch, but she's been done in by a couple of kids. And like it's kind of like gave me this like, are fairy tales real in the Discworld? Like, did Hansel and Gretel really happen? Because I think this would be like really interesting lore, but it's never confirmed. I mentioned in the last review, Pratchett really trusts his audience, and this did not stop in this book. It's still there. You're still kind of like expected to to come to your own conclusions, to figure this out along the way. There are like very minimal hints. So like again, really trusting his audience. And from this gingerbread house, they escape on a flying broomstick, which I felt must have been, or like the cover art must have been a nod to that, because like there are these two characters on a broomstick flying towards, well, a burning wall of fire. But so that was kind of like, oh yeah, that's cute, that's nice. But it also like there's this kind of like through line, especially at the beginning, of people denying reality in the Discworld. So like trees keep talking to Rincewind, and he's like, trees can't talk, no, trees can't talk. And then when they're on this broomstick, they kind of fly through some other dimension. I'm not entirely sure. Like I said, sometimes you just don't really understand what's happening, but it's fun. And then like characters witness that. I don't remember if it was it was the two shaman that keep showing up in the beginning. And it's just kind of like, did you just see two people fly through upside down on a broomstick? No, I didn't. No, I didn't either. Nope, nope, nope. They just kind of keep denying reality, which like in the same way that I wondered, like, are fairy tales real in Discworld? Is just like, do people on the disc not know how their world works? I mean, it's definitely a possibility. We don't know exactly how the world works that we live in, so it's definitely a possibility. But like, it was it made me curious. Oh yeah, and with the red star that appears in the sky, there are also like stakes introduced. So we have like, oh yeah, this is where Great Attunes is heading. It's all going to happen on Hogswatch Night. I have absolutely no idea what Hogswatch Night is. I feel like I'm just saying a nonsensical word. And like, oh, there, and the great and the 8 spells of the octavo have to be set together or not set together. So like, there are kind of like a little bit of stakes introduced. I did write down when I was reading, because it's kind of presented as, oh, this is going to be the end of the world. And I kind of like wrote down, like, really? Because this is a pet peeve of mine. The end of the world is not going to happen. And especially second book in. And later I kind of like revised that of like, okay, but I'm saying this now when I know there are like 30 more books to come. would people who just picked up this book, Color of Magic, then The Light Fantastic, would people who don't know that there is more coming, who read this book when it came out, would they still have thought that, oh, like it's not going to be the end of the world because we just got started? I feel like maybe because that would, I mean, it would be a bold move. But again, like I feel like you're not going to do that. So why introduce those kinds of stakes? I also felt like there was like subtle moral and ethical commentary. So the wizards kind of reminded me of capitalists in a very abstract, vague sense. Like I feel like I'm gonna have to explain that one, but there's this like there are eight top wizards, eight wizards of the eighth rank because eight is a magical number in the Discworld. The wizards from the lower ranks are always kind of vying for these top eight spots. And it's explicitly said that they are not above killing one of the top eight wizards in order to get ahead, in order to get those spots. So that kind of reminds me of this like cutthroat capitalistic world. But it felt like very much like Pratchett was critiquing that. He was not agreeing with it. Wizards are terrible people. But we also get like one of the wizards. His name is Tryman, and he is described as, and like the way he is described made me think like he's kind of autistically coded. Like he has these kind of like very logical train of thoughts, very much like, oh, he wants magic to work like science. He's like, he likes numbers, he doesn't like conversation or small talk, and he's all about like getting from point A to point B in the most direct way. I wasn't expecting that in a book written in the 80s to have like a character that reads as autistic coded. Like again, he's not the perfect representation. He's also not one of the good guys. He very much is kind of like an antagonist by the end, or especially towards Rincewind, he acts as an antagonist. I wouldn't necessarily call him a bad guy, but there aren't also very many good guys. I wouldn't even call Rincewind a good guy. That's kind of like the moral ambiguity of the Discworld. But yeah, so like I was kind of surprised, like, oh, is he maybe? And also, Tryman sends a heroine after Rincewind because kind of like everybody is after Rincewind because of the spell in his head. And like I said, with the whole like red star and all of the eight spells need to be set together, but we don't have the eighth spell because this one is in this other dude's head, and so they all want to kind of like want to get to Rincewind. This heroine is described as wearing sensible chainmail after I think a couple of paragraphs of like how other heroines would have been described as wearing like very scantal as being like very scantily clad, and how nonsensical that is. That kind of felt like a direct commentary on what I mentioned in the previous book of like how there were a couple of women who were described as being scantily clad, and how it was kind of like, did you have to? And this one felt like kind of like, no, I didn't. Sorry about that. Here is a sensibly clad heroine who wears the proper protection for what she's about to do. So I almost felt like this one was specifically for me. Like Pratchett kind of went like, oh yeah, no, that wasn't the best choice I ever made, so I'm gonna rectify that in this book. Kind of also make me feel like he respects women, and he would have been very horrified at some of the stuff that is going on nowadays. So also, one of the episodes that happens is Rincewind goes to the Netherworld, which is Death's domain, because Two Flower sort of died, but also not really. And that is a very accurate way to describe Pratchett's storytelling style. Like, yeah, he sort of died, but not really, and you're just gonna have to go along with the ride. Trust me. And in this Netherworld, they meet Death's daughter. Death has an adopted daughter, which I thought was just a really sweet touch. I mean, she's very unhinged, but it also made me look forward to, there is a Death series in the Discworld, so it also made me look forward to reading that because I kind of just want to know more about that. And the really interesting thing about this Netherworld is Two Flower takes a picture with his what is it called? Iconoscope, the thing that works like a camera. And I mentioned in the last review that I thought it would work like a printer or function like a printer, and but then there is a tiny little imp in it that draws pictures, but he also runs out of ink, so it's still printer coded. And Rincewind also thought it would function like a printer, and there was it's mentioned that he was kind of like disappointed that there's an imp inside because that just doesn't make sense. Can't things just make sense? But Two Flower takes a picture in the Netherworld, and then once they get out of the Netherworld, yeah, spoiler alert, they don't die. Once they get out of the Netherworld, Rincewind looks at this picture, and it doesn't look like what he saw with his own eyes. And the imp, when he tells the imp, like, "Oh, this is not what I saw," the imp just kind of said, "Well, you saw what you saw, and I saw what I saw, and I drew what I saw." The picture is never described. Like it says it looks different from what Rincewind saw in the Netherworld, but it never describes what the picture actually looks like. And I thought this was just a very interesting choice because Pratchett, this like kind of means Pratchett is aware of when to leave stuff to the reader's imagination. Because I feel like everything he could have described might have just fallen short of what a potential reader imagines in their head. And just like I said, Pratchett trusts his audience. And I just love that. So let's talk about the ending. Major spoilers ahead now. I'm gonna reveal the final twist. So if you haven't read it, skip the rest of this video probably. No, I will put in a time code when I talk more generally again, but I am gonna talk about the ending. If you haven't read the book and you don't want to know the ending, skip this. Once again, I got to the end, like 70 pages before the end, and I had no idea where the story was going. And I was kind of like getting a little bit nervous of like, I don't think the rest of the story is going to fit into the remainder of the book. But Pratchett surprised me. It did. It all ended very well. So even though I didn't know where the story was going, I was very entertained throughout. And then the Red Star turns out to be basically the birth of 8 new Discworlds. So there are 8 moons circling around the star, and each turns out to be an egg. So basically, Great Atuan travels to this red star to witness the birth of his children, which is really fucking cute. So like 8 moons, and then out of these 8 moons hatch 8 mini sky turtles, complete with 4 world elephants on top of them and a disc. Like I said, this is really cute, and this was really unexpectedly wholesome. Like this whole book, you're like, oh my god, we're headed toward the end times, and everything is going to be over, and the Discworld is going to end, and then it's the opposite. It's the birth of 8 new Discworlds. And like I said, I didn't think it was going to be the end of the world, but that was so unexpectedly wholesome, which just, made this whole thing a very satisfying resolution. Like, a very like we get this like extremely happy ending. Everybody survives. I mean, the wizards are kind of turned into stone, but I don't feel bad for them because they were terrible people to begin with. So, and at the very end, Two Flower leaves. Like he's kind of like, oh, but have you really traveled until you return home and you can tell those stories? And it made me tear up a little bit. Like it was very bittersweet, and I kind of find Two Flowers' naivete a little bit annoying. I have to admit, like he is kind of like one of those characters where I'm like, oh god, grasp the danger that you're in. Why don't you grasp the danger that you're in? And Rincewind mentions this in the book, and Two Flowers kind of like, well, if you believe everything is going to turn out all right, then everything is going to turn out all right, which is kind of infuriating, but also like kind of endearing. So when he decides to leave, I was kind of like, "Aww." Also, they kind of like set up that Rincewind might re-enroll in the Unseen University to learn proper magic, because throughout the 2 books, it's kind of like he's not a real wizard because he can't keep any other spells in his head because they're all terrified of the Octavo spell in his head. So at the end, the spell is gone. He's used it. It's used to like make the baby turtles hatch. So the spell is gone, and so he might like re-enroll. And then right at the very end, like last paragraph, the narrative kind of like zooms out. It's kind of like this literary equivalent of the backing away shot to like kind of reveal the scope. And until even Great Atuan is kind of like a little speck in the distance, which I thought just was like a really satisfying way to end the story. So let's talk a little bit more about the characters. So big spoilers are over now. like, I think it's fair to say I've mentioned this. It's the same people as last time. So we have Rincewind, we have Two Flower, we have the luggage, and we have death. And like we get a little bit of expansion on the universe. Like I said, there are the wizards. There is a kind of random shaman that turns up in the beginning, and he disappears a little bit throughout. But and I did mention this a little bit, that Rincewind's naivete is kind of a little bit annoying. But then we get this paragraph. It's really late into the book. Like the whole book has 250, 280, somewhere around that pages. And on page 201, we get this like really interesting a really interesting glance into Rincewind's into Two Flower's mind, where it says, against the whole of human experience, Two Flower believed that if only people would talk to each other, have a few drinks, exchange pictures of their grandchildren, maybe take in a show or something, then everything could be sorted out. And like on the one hand, this made me laugh out loud because like, wouldn't that be nice? It's not going to happen, but wouldn't that be nice? But it also once again reminded me of Doctor Who, of this 12th Doctor story, two-parter, the Zygon Invasion and the Zygon Inversion, where he has this like speech of how every conflict can kind of like be resolved, like sit down and talk.
This is a scale model of war. Every war ever fought right there in front of you. How much blood will spill until everybody does what they're always going to have to do from the very beginning? Sit down and talk!
I'm kind of like, because this is like a story of New Who, and I wonder, like, the writers of Doctor Who must know Discworld, must have read Discworld, must have taken like a little bit of inspiration from Discworld. And I'm not blaming them. It's a very good book to take inspiration from, but just I love that moment. And yeah, so the luggage is this reoccurring gag. It regularly eats people. Very funny. Also, there's this moment of like, it's constantly described as looking at people, and then it kind of like gets qualified later on of like, I don't know how it's looking at me. It doesn't have any eyes, but it's looking at me. Why is it looking at me? Because it's gonna eat you. That's why it's looking at you. And again, this story just felt very, very Pratchett again. We have the predictable unpredictability. So this story allows for some guessing moments sometimes, but Pratchett just constantly subverts expectations again. For example, in the very beginning, there's this build up of raw magic. And I kind of guess that it had to do with saving Rincewind from falling off the edge of the disc. Oh yeah, there's the spell in his head. There's a buildup of raw magic. The wizards run into the room where they keep the octavo, and I'm like, oh yeah, that was mentioned in the last book, and I was right about that. But then, like I said, 70 pages before the end, I had no idea where the story is going. So like sometimes you can guess. Sometimes I'm like, oh yeah, no, no, I see what you're doing, and then he goes somewhere completely differently. That doesn't really matter. I feel like you're just along for the ride, and it's a fun ride. He keeps me entertained. He keeps me on the edge of my seat. So he's just a very good writer, and I cannot recommend the Discworld series enough. Just after reading the two books that I have, read those books. They're very fun. They're very entertaining, and like there's this very absurd humor. So one example I will give is there is this librarian at the Unseen University who doesn't speak. He makes sounds, but he doesn't speak, and people keep giving him bananas. And I just like, okay, that seems a little bit weird, but why not? And then at the very end, it is revealed that this librarian is a monkey. And I literally did not put this together until the book spelled it out to me. And then I was like, of course he's a monkey. Yeah, they keep giving him bananas. Of course he's a monkey. Like, but I didn't put it together because it's so absurd, but also so internally logical. Top notch, Pratchett. Top notch. The other thing, like, and the luggage comes from one of those traveling magic shops that are there one day and disappear the other, leaving only a brick wall behind, which they kind of treat as a universal constant. Like, everywhere in the universe, there are these shops. And, like, this is kind of like humorous, but it's not just flavor text. Because by the end, Rincewind, Two Flower, the luggage, and some people they picked up along the way, like a barbarian and some virgin who was going to be sacrificed, but then they saved her. They end up in one of those traveling magic shops, and that's how they get back to Ankh-Morpork, the city that burned down in the beginning of the first book, which I at first thought was kind of like a continuity error, but then they explain it away. Oh yeah, the city gets burnt down on the regular, and they just rebuild it every time. But they end up in like one of these traveling magic shops, and that's how they get back to Ankh-Morpork, and that's where they need to be because that's where Unseen University is, and that's where like the whole thing with the spells and the red star and the moons and the whole ending happens. Sorry, I just spoiled this again. But I did say at the very beginning, spoiler warnings. Once again, I found there were like kind of subtle references to Good Omens. There's this like mention that there are fake fossil bones put there by a creator with nothing better to do than upset future archaeologists. And this just reeks of the line, the whole business with the fossilized dinosaur skeletons is a joke the paleontologists haven't seen yet, which is a quote from both the Good Omens book and the Good Omens show. So yeah, I can see where Good Omens comes from. I can see where the humor in Good Omens comes from, and I can see why I enjoyed Good Omens so much. Was this a good book? Was this a good sequel? Or was it a great one? I mean, I think I gave it away in the whole review. I think it's a great one. I enjoyed this book very much. I think I enjoyed it slightly more than I enjoyed The Color of Magic. So the story is more continuous, less episodic. There's this stronger through line. So it feels more like a complete novel with like a beginning, middle, end with like a climax, which made it feel more consistent and coherent than The Color of Magic. But everything else was the same. So, like, we have the humor, the style, the world building, the character consistency, and all of that is just top notch. Really enjoyed it. So, and we get this very satisfying ending. I talked about in the major spoiler section with like the very happy conclusion that kind of feels like it could be the end of the series, but leaves kind of like the door just like a little bit open for further adventures. Which I mean, I kind of know are happening because I'm reading this in 2026, where all of the Discworld novels have already been released, at least the ones that Terry Pratchett got to finish. So I still rated it 4 out of 5 stars, which is the same rating I gave The Color of Magic. But I feel like this could be more like a 4.25 stars. I would still round it down to 4 stars, but like I said, I enjoyed it slightly more than The Color of Magic. And Pratchett remains very imaginative, very witty, and masterful at balancing absurdity with internal logic. So, overall, just a very, very fun ride. Do I recommend this book? Yes, very much so, but with the slight caveat that I would definitely say read The Color of Magic before you read The Light Fantastic. This is very much a sequel in the truest sense of the word, and it doesn't hold your hand, like I said at the beginning. So read The Color of Magic first. If you like that, continue with The Light Fantastic. It is absolutely worth the ride. So yeah, that has been my review of the second Discworld novel, The Light Fantastic. I will be taking a little bit of a break from the Discworld series, not because I don't enjoy it, actually because I enjoyed so much that I want to savor it a little bit and like spread it out. So the Color of Magic review should already be up, and when this one goes out, like they should be coming out like a week or two apart. But after this one, I will be returning to the regularly scheduled Shakespeare analysis before returning to the Discworld series. So I hope you've enjoyed this little review of mine. But for now, this is me signing off. Thanks everyone for watching. If you enjoyed this video, please make sure to like, share, and comment down below. And don't forget to hit subscribe if you don't want to miss any of my future videos. I also have a Patreon that you can subscribe to, starting at as little as $2 a month, which gives you early access to any of my videos. Higher tiers include access to exclusive Patreon-only content and the chance to suggest books, plays, or poems for any future analysis. For now, that is it from me, and I'll see you next time.